we'll get going. Maybe a few more people will join us as we get started. It's really lovely to see everybody. For those that are just joining, I'm Ben. My pronouns he, him, and I'm the movement organizer at MedAct. And it's very lovely to see you all on a Tuesday evening in the UK. And we've got a really exciting evening coming up. It's first of all been great to see some people at the onboarding call that has just happened at 6:30 for the Health for a Green New Deal campaign. And tonight is the first of our Movement Builders sessions. And these are sessions that happen every 2 months in the Health for a Green New Deal campaign. And this is the first one. And as Bryce said, we've got an absolute treat this evening. We've got 3 incredible people and organisers and activists from the climate justice movement. And our focus tonight is looking ahead to what's the deal with COP26. And I'm not going to say anything more than that, but I'll let you know the bit of the outline. So we've got 3 awesome speakers that I will introduce kind of in turn, Nguyen, Scott and Dorothy. And then there will be a little bit of time at the end for questions before we share a few kind of exciting things coming up at MedAct and with the Health for a Green New Deal campaign and some of our plans looking ahead towards COP. Awesome. So without anything further, I'm very delighted to introduce Nguyen. Nguyen works for the COP26 Coalition as the Scottish coordinator and is going to cover the basics on what COP26 is, what it isn't, and why it's important to mobilise for climate justice this year. And he's trying not to drink caffeine, so might be a bit tired, but good luck with that. I don't know how you do it, Nguyen. Over to you.
I don't know why I put that into my bio. Sorry about this. It was yesterday, it was late. Thanks everyone, and thanks Ben for a lovely welcome. I'm not going to use slides. I think I've got some, but I think I'll just keep it like a little bit informal. So my name's Nguyen. I live in Edinburgh, officially in Glasgow, but that hasn't materialized and our office again got delayed. I'm a bit cursed about this, but hopefully I'm going to be working from Glasgow soon, and I'm really looking forward to see all of you, hopefully there or elsewhere. I've worked with MedAct before and it was really, really great. So I hope to see as many of you on the street as possible, regardless of whether that's in Glasgow or anywhere else. So yeah, really happy to be here. I'm just going to start with a short outline what COP26 is and what you need to know. I don't want to go into much detail because you probably know quite a lot already and it's kind of like boring. What's more important for me is what it isn't and what it won't deliver, because all of us want COP26 to succeed in some way, but I really want to explain why this is not likely to be the case. And what is lacking from both the process and the content, and then go into some details why this needs to drive all of us to the streets this November, before that and after that. So yeah, so COP26 stands for Conference of the Parties. 26 because it's the 26th time that this conference happens. It's happening as part of the so-called UNFCCC, which is the United Nations Framework for Convention for Climate Change, which was created in 1992. And this basically means all the nations around the world in the UN have agreed we should sit down together and tackle climate change and come up with like agreements on how we drive emissions down. So, which is in theory really great. And some of the landmark agreements under this you probably have heard of, like the Kyoto Protocol or the Paris Agreement, which are all treaties under the UNFCCC that came out of like previous COPs. The Paris Agreement in 2015 is in particular important because it has established like this way of like reporting emissions with nationally determined contributions. That is also something you're going to hear quite a lot, which basically like national determined contributions is just every nation just kind of like announcing how much emissions they're gonna reduce, and there's no like legally binding thing to it. It's just kind of like you just say it, and if you stick to it or not is like a different question. Yeah, and that's what COP26 is. It's the 26th time all the parties to that agreement meet up together and try to come up with a new agreement. They're gonna hopefully call it Glasgow Agreement or something like that. And there's quite a lot of media chat about this being the most important COP since forever, because this is the COP where the Paris Agreement needs updating, where like new targets need to be met to like stick to a below 2 degree, 1.5 degree if possible targets. So that's quite a lot of technical jargon. And there's going to be more of that the closer the COP comes and the more you pay attention to it. That is partly on purpose. Partly it's because it's a really complicated negotiation, but partly it's also because these processes try to depoliticize climate change. They are mostly dominated by so-called global north countries that are trying to protect their vested interests, while the so-called global south countries, the countries that are most affected by climate change and have done the least to cause it, are structurally so disadvantaged and can't properly voice their concerns. So what happens at COPs is usually that the global north tries to either like stall it with technical questions or like so-called false solutions. False solutions are solutions that don't address the root cause of the climate crisis, but are designed to keep polluters in power, keep the money flowing towards fossil fuels, and don't really address anything that underlies the climate crisis. And that is why COP26 is going to be so technical, because that makes it more difficult for us to hold them to account. Because when you think about the climate crisis, it's really important to remember that the climate crisis is really just a symptom, but also a cause of a dysfunctioning economic system. So without any solution that actually goes to the heart of it, that tries to reform or transform the economic system as it stands globally, you won't really address the climate crisis. And anything that comes up in these discussions, like carbon pricing mechanisms, carbon markets, and these kind of things that are going to be really, really big and heavily featured at this year's COP, are not going to solve the climate crisis because they don't address the underlying issue. And yeah, at the same time, this COP, so that happens at all COPs, like it happened in Madrid, it happened in Copenhagen, it happened in all the previous COPs, but this COP is likely to be even worse than that. So I don't want to be like too doom and gloom. I'm also like a very cheery person normally, but we already know that this COP is worse than the usual ones because of the COVID pandemic. So which has, again, like the climate crisis, hit the countries that are most marginalized, the poorest, have hit them hardest, while the richest countries managed to like scoop up all the vaccines. So lots of the countries couldn't actually, like the UNFCCC usually have pre-negotiations. They couldn't do that. They had to have it online because they couldn't meet up in person, which again disadvantaged the countries that are most impacted by climate change because of like connection issues, because of time zone differences, because of all these kind of things. They couldn't properly participate in the pre-negotiations, and that will also play out at the COP itself, because many countries in the global south are not vaccinated yet. The vaccination rate in developing countries is, I think, at 2%, while most European and North American countries are like far, far ahead and are thinking of going back to normal. So this kind of like imbalance is going to impact negotiations. Lots of delegations are worried, like actual official negotiators are worried whether they can actually make it because they're not vaccinated, because they fear for their safety and the community safety. That's not speaking about actually like observers, like NGOs who try to like observe what's going on and hold the negotiators to account. And that's also not saying anything about like activists from the global south, indigenous communities from the global south. All these people don't really know how they can participate, how they can come there. And with their voice lacking, we should really not be surprised that this COP is the least inclusive, the least accessible, and the least transparent COP since for quite a while, at least. So yeah, so that is what the COP is. And that is why the COP can't deliver climate justice. That is what we ourselves need to build. And that's why the COP26 Coalition is calling for action, because the only voice for climate justice and health justice and work justice and all forms of justice is going to be each of us and all of our organizations and all of our friends, families, and your fellow activists that we need to bring on the street, because otherwise no one's going to hold these people to account. They're going to just push things through, and we need to go out there and say the truth, call out all the greenwash that comes out, and hold them to account. And that's why we need to mobilize as strongly as possible. We're organizing a global day of action on November the 6th, where we call for a really big demonstration in Glasgow, but because we are also trying to be more responsible than the government, we are also calling for decentralized mobilization. So if you don't feel safe traveling to Glasgow, or if you can't find accommodation in Glasgow or whatever, mobilize your hometown, mobilize in your home country, go to the streets wherever. If you just take your grandma and your neighbor to a demo, that's enough. What's important is that we build this movement from the ground up and mobilize as many people as we can. And after that, we're going to hold a People Summit from the 7th to the 10th of November. It will be both in person in Glasgow as well as online, so that you can hear from frontline communities, from negotiators, from activists across the world, how we can build our movement, how we can fight for climate justice, not only at this COP, but beyond COP, and hold our governments and polluters to account. So that is what it's about. So I'm going to end. I think I've went a little bit over time already. No? Okay, then I can keep talking. Yay. Yeah, so I know that this was kind of like depressing news, but yeah, so, but I really don't want you to be discouraged from this. Don't expect like COP26 to like solve all your problems and solve like literally anything. What you need to see is the interests that lie behind the different negotiating parties and call these out. And what you also need to see is that COP26 can be a success for us in terms of building our movement, because we know that our governments won't deliver climate justice, right? We know that's not in their interest, and we know that this is not the agenda they pursue. But we can use COP26 as a moment to build our movements and organize together for transformative change. And that is really what this should be about. And that is how we should measure success. How can we position ourselves in a better educated, in a better motivated way to push for justice in all areas, whether it's health, whether it's climate, whether it's social justice. And that is what the COP26 Coalition is going to do. And I hope MEDAC is going to join us. I already know that Ben and Rob and some other keen beans are going to they're doing loads of massive good work on this. So, and we all know how interlinked health justice and climate justice is. So yeah, I'm really hoping to see like a really strong health justice marching bloc in Glasgow, in London, everywhere. And I'm really looking forward to that. So I'm going to close here, and thank you for having me. And yeah.
Thank you so much, Nguyen. You're getting loads of love from everybody in the room, in the space. Thank you so much for such a powerful call to action, and we will be there with you on the streets and in solidarity. Awesome. I'm now very excited to introduce Scott Tully. Scott is a member of Glasgow Calls Out Polluters, and also wears lots of other wonderful hats. Scott is going to be giving you a tour of the murky world of big polluters at COP26 in 20 screen grabs. And that was the best intro that I've ever had. So yeah, go for it, Scott. Thank you.
Okay, I'm off mute. So yeah, hello everyone, and it's just great to be here, getting to talk about COP26 and the importance of like challenging big polluters at COP26. So yeah, I'm Scott. I'm a kind of grassroots organiser with Glasgow Calls Out Polluters, and yeah, we're a grassroots group based roughly in Glasgow, but kind of inclusive of people across the UK and across Europe, and we're organising to kick big polluters out of COP26. And once my screen loads up, something about me, I have a very slow computer. Yeah, this guy here is Alok Sharma, who is the COP26 president. and Conservative Minister. He's somebody you'll be hearing quite a lot about over the next 15 minutes or so. So this will be quite a whistle-stop tour, but hopefully I can convey the importance and the necessity to kick big polluters out of international climate talks. So I'm just going to dive straight in by going through a kind of headline example of big polluters influencing the COP process before relating things to COP26 more specifically. So if you're a big polluter like Shell, you most definitely want to make sure that at international climate talks, your interests are protected. Now, obviously, those interests conflict with the vast majority of the globe, but obviously that is of secondary concern. And yeah, that's kind of what happens. Those interests do get protected. So here is an example of a Shell oil executive bragging about helping to write a very consequential and dangerous part of the Paris Agreement, and what is basically a blatant example of malign corporate influence. So how did this guy get here? How did he get access to the COP in the first place? Never mind start writing important climate policy. I'm going to encourage you to keep those questions in your head because I'm definitely going to come back to them. But with that little bit of context, I'm going to move on to COP26 more specifically. Right, so we wrote this open letter to COP26 President Alok Sharma, demanding that big polluters are kicked out of the climate talks. You can see quite a lot of organisations signed it, including MedAct, I should say. But I guess the question is what did Alok Sharma say in response? Okay, it took him a while to respond. So we had to organise a meme storm and basically send him meme-based threats to get him to respond to us. So if you take nothing else away from what I say, please just take home with you the power of memes. But yeah, we got an online meeting with him and a written response, both of which were distinctly unimpressive. And I'll be going through some of the kind of key bad responses just now. So we had 5 demands in our open letter. I'm also going to use these as well, just to broadly frame the main areas of concern around big polluters at COP26. A lot of what I'm speaking about will focus on the UK government, partly just because, at this stage they have been our main target, but also because as the kind of host nation and as the president, they have a bit more power than usual at COP26. Okay, so our first demand was to restrict polluter access to COP spaces. So schmoozing opportunities like this are all too common in official COP spaces. This particular image is taken from an event inside COP25 in Madrid. Now, unsurprisingly, Alok Sharma doesn't want to take serious action to turn away big polluters, and he's fairly relaxed about things like this continuing. There's nothing on his agenda that is going to stop big polluters using the official COP space as a kind of schmoozing opportunity. But he did say that the UK's pavilion space will be open only to corporations who have signed up to the flagship Race to Zero programme. If you follow anything to do with COP, you'll hear quite a lot about the Race to Zero programme or the Race to Zero campaign. And he said that anybody who signed up to this or the Science Based Targets Initiative will be only those people will be allowed to enter the kind of UK official pavilion space. So different nations get different pavilion spaces, and yeah, these kind of programs like the Race to Zero are initiatives where businesses pledge to reach net zero by 2050. Might sound good, but when you see who are signed up to these initiatives, you can see people like Drax, who some of you I'm sure are well aware of. They are literally the UK's biggest carbon emitter, and they're seen here speaking just absolute nonsense at the UK's COP25 pavilion in Madrid, scoring some free PR points to paint themselves as part of the solution. The criteria for Race to Zero and the Science Based Targets initiatives also include Heathrow Airport, because they don't count flights as emissions, so that's okay. It includes HSBC, massive financier of fossil fuels, BAE Systems, Bayer, Nestle, Halliburton, and the list goes on. These companies are all ongoing climate criminals and are getting the legitimacy of being able to associate themselves with the COP26 presidency. So oil and gas majors haven't been ruled out of these flagship programmes, and I would not be surprised to see more oil and gas majors included as we approach COP26. And indeed, if I can give like something that's somewhat of an exclusive, there will be some news stories coming out to that effect pretty soon. So I encourage you to keep your eyes peeled. So this is just another bit of information. This was a collaboration that we did with the kind of Scottish investigative outlet, the Ferret, where we were able to reveal that at the kind of COP intercessionals, which are like this kind of pre-meeting that Nguyen mentioned earlier, it was all online. We had 138 big polluters attending these key climate talks, despite the fact that they were all online. So the indications are very much that big polluters are once again circling around to make sure that their agendas are front and centre at the COP. But here's one slightly positive development. People might have seen this over the last few days. Glasgow City Council actually voted to not have big polluters present in Glasgow City Council owned spaces at COP26. So a lot of the big polluter side events, etc., shouldn't in theory be happening in publicly owned buildings at COP26 in Glasgow. Publicly owned buildings is an important caveat because that does not include the main venue, which now becomes under like the UN kind of aegis, and it doesn't include like private spaces. But nevertheless, this sends an important message to big polluters that they are not welcome in Glasgow at COP26. That said, I also encourage you to keep your eyes peeled on this story because there are very big concerns and question marks over whether Glasgow City Council will actually implement these steps in a serious way, or whether they will just simply defer to things like the Race to Zero programme or other forms of big polluter greenwashing. So, in short, this is far from over. Rightio. Sponsorship. Let's have a look at some of the sponsors. Okay, so we have here Unilever, massive plastic polluter with human rights abuses against Indigenous peoples in the palm oil supply chain. We've got SSE, who runs Scotland's biggest polluting facility and are also expanding fossil fuel infrastructure across the UK as we speak. Sky, okay, Sky is a bit weird. I mean, Rupert Murdoch, probably one of the least bad sponsors, to be honest, which might tell a story of its own. We've got Scottish Power here, who are in Scotland. They are renewable based, but their parent company are called Iberdrola, and they have been linked to like a host of environmental and human rights crimes. Right, so that's only the top row. I'm not going to go through the rest. The story is largely the same. These companies embody a lot of things. They embody racism, they embody climate breakdown, they embody cynical corporate profiteering, but they are most definitely not a model for any sensible climate future. So what we can expect to see is a lot of this sort of empty posturing from people who are doing very little to solve the climate crisis, but doing all they can to present themselves as the solution to the climate crisis. That said, okay, what I've said there hasn't been too great, but there is always resistance, and as much as similar to what Wong said, as much as like there's a lot about the COP that isn't great, the message I want to bring is also one of the importance of resistance. So I'll give you one example, which is us with Extinction Rebellion Scotland blockading the big gas station, Scotland's biggest polluting facility, in Peterhead with a green washing machine, which you can see just down there, which at least, if nothing else, has a very, very in-your-face kind of metaphorical value. Okay, so with the UK government hosting COP26, one thing they get is like some small agenda-setting power. So if you remember the Race to Zero thing that I mentioned a few slides back, well, one thing they're really pushing hard on is this idea of businesses setting net zero targets by 2050. But as I'll just outline, this is basically them swallowing and supporting the lies of big polluters. I mean, why? Well, it's a kind of new in vogue thing for big polluters now to jump on this bandwagon and say they'll set net zero targets by 2050. But very crucially, these targets are pretty much mostly all about optics and looking good, because these businesses have very, very little intention of changing their core business model. So, like, as our friends at Corporate Accountability highlight, I highly recommend this report, and please get your hands on it. It's easily found online. As Corporate Accountability highlight, what these companies tend to do is they'll say something like, "Oh, what we'll do is develop some carbon capture and storage technology sometime in the future to suck all their emissions out the air, and it'll all be fine, net zero by 2050. Just with that one particular, with carbon capture and storage technology, so many big polluters are basing emissions reductions on that, not in actually reducing their emissions. And one of the problems with carbon capture and storage technology is that it doesn't exist at scale yet, and there's a high likelihood that it will never do so. So in short, it's a PR ruse, and big polluters know it. They just don't really care, and the UK government are quite happily supporting this agenda. So just to take it back to my good friend Alok Sharma for a second, when he responded to us in writing about carbon capture and storage, this is what he said to us, and it's not particularly great. He described carbon capture and storage as a necessity, not an option for the transition to net zero. So this basing of decarbonisation on carbon capture and storage is almost the perfect example of how much the corporate agenda intertwines with the agenda of our political class. And it's also just very important to emphasise that, like, the solutions for a just transition away from fossil fuels are by and large out there. But the big problem is they conflict with the motives of big polluters. And as was said, this issue of false solutions and fighting against false solutions is going to be a big issue at COP26. So this is kind of like the key issue surrounding big polluters at COPs. It is the conflict of interest policy. So you might be aware that big tobacco are banned from World Health Organization talks because, well, obviously their profit motive is a clear conflict of interest. What we say, and what plenty of people say across the world, is that the same principle here applies with big polluters at COPs. Again, this isn't really our fight. This is nothing new. It's been pushed for years, led broadly by people from the so-called Global South, but has largely been met with resistance from the rich governments of the North. And it can be quite a fraught issue that kind of reaches the kind of levels of really weird absurdity. So this is from 2017, and this is the Asian people's movements being banned from saying the words corporate capture in the kind of UNFCCC halls in order to maintain an atmosphere of respect. So again, this is something we asked Alok Sharma about, and I highly recommend going to our website at gcop.scot because you can see pretty much what Alok Sharma said about a conflict of interest. And you can also feel free to let us know if any of it actually makes any sense, because I couldn't parse anything clear or coherent in his response to a conflict of interest policy. We've also released some videos starring our very own Alok Sharma, which is basically one of our organisers in a hard hat, to debunk his waffly responses to our open letter. It's very commonplace around this issue of a conflict of interest for parties to pretend that they've got no power to bring it forward, and Alok Sharma was no different. Like the UNFCCC will tell us to ask the nations or the parties, and the nations or parties will then tell us to ask the UNFCCC. But like everything, this is a political issue, not a technical issue, and could be changed with enough political will and pressure. Okay, finally, climate justice. Right, so much to unpack here, so little time. We asked Alok Sharma to deliver climate justice. All I'm going to do is give one examples of big polluters flying in the face of climate justice, and it's on a term that Nguyen mentioned earlier. It's on carbon markets. So carbon markets are on the agenda at COP26. And carbon markets basically mean that big polluters can continue polluting, can overshoot their emissions, but in theory can offset those emissions by buying credits from low emitters or through other activities like tree planting. Never mind if you have to kick somebody off their land, that's obviously an afterthought. You can probably see like why big polluters like it, because it kind of allows them to continue what they're doing. And yeah, the UK government are pushing hard on carbon markets. They've had a spectacularly unsuccessful track record. They've been used in the COP process for ages and have led to like lots of human rights abuses, but again, really broadly just allow big polluters to keep on polluting instead of cutting emissions. And as Nguyen said, also just sound really boring and technical, and very much are designed to like off-put people from taking any sort of action against them. Right, so for this slide, the part of the Paris Agreement that this guy from Shell wrote, so this part of the Paris Agreement the guy from Shell wrote was on carbon markets. So it very much is something that some of the worst polluters in the world are very much embedded with. And this guy from Shell gets access to COP26 places through a shadowy trade organisation called the International Emissions Trading Association, or IETA. Now, these trade associations are going to be everywhere at COP26, but I'm just going to focus on IETA just for the time being, because I've only got time to focus on one. So you can see kind of who they represent here, which basically is like a who's who of climate criminals. You know, you've got BP, Shell, Total, Chevron, so on and so forth. They are there at the COP to represent their interests and push forward the issue of carbon markets. So whenever carbon markets are on the agenda, and as they're on the agenda at Glasgow, they tend to flood the conference with delegates to push forward their malign interests. Glasgow will be no different, and it's very much up to us to resist. So if you look here in 2005 in Montreal, they brought 400, that's unbelievable, 402 delegates, whilst the average government delegation was only 22. At COP29, or COP25, sorry, in 2019, 129 delegates attended, more than the 58 average government delegation. In Glasgow, I fully expect them to come all guns blazing to try and push through the issue of carbon markets. And like I said, it's up to us to resist that. Okay, so I've not painted, I know I've not painted kind of similar to Long, I've not painted a brilliant picture of things in this very short window, but please, if nothing else, take home the necessity to organise resistance to these corporations and do what you can to stand in solidarity with those fighting on the front lines when these big polluters descend on Glasgow and descend on the UK to try and embed their agendas into international climate policy, because what they're trying to embed will have horrible, horrible consequences. And it's on us to do what we can to support the fight for climate justice and build our movement so it's strong enough to kind of take the power back. So I'm going to just finish there. That was a lot of information. I got through a lot in a very short amount of time. I hope, if nothing else, you just found that whirlwind of information useful. And these are the places where you can find us in terms of Glasgow calls out polluters. And I'm going to leave it there and take myself off screen share. So thanks very much, folks.
Thanks so much, Scott. That was an incredible tour of the big polluters and all the horrendous things that they are up to. And also just like the incredible organising of Glasgow Calls Out Polluters and Allies. It's been just incredible to see and be part of. And yeah, keep going, taking the power of memes as forms of resistance. So yeah, thanks so much, Scott. That was awesome. Finally, I've got the pleasure of introducing Dorothy Guerrero. Dorothy is head of policy and advocacy at Global Justice Now since 2017, and her work in social movements and NGOs spans more than 30 years, and she is also part of the Global Solidarity Group as part of the COP26 Coalition. And it's an absolute pleasure, Dorothy, to have you with us tonight. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ben. And then also I'm happy to join you this evening for this talk. I will slightly revise what I originally planned to present, because also taking what Quan mentioned and also what Scott mentioned, I think it is important to see as well how, to be able to see what will happen in COP26. It is important to look back as well. And because that's our pattern, that we could see, or we could already predict what will happen in COP26 by looking at how many of the positions from the Southern governments in the previous COPs were silenced or ignored or set aside, and how this phenomena of corporate capture of global governance have increased since the last 2 decades or the last 20 years. If we would look at the history of COP negotiations, when I first joined or prepared for a COP, it was the preparation for the Bali Conference of Parties, which was held in 2007 in Indonesia. And at that time, that was like the beginning of really intense North-South division in the negotiation. It would be good to be reminded as well that, of course, this is a negotiation. At the end of the day, the countries would want to happen things that would prevent them, one, from changing their economy, or at least to continue their path to development. So it's a national interest at stake here as well. And that is also the reason why you have groupings wherein countries with similar interests are also grouped together as blocs, like small island states have their blocks or have their grouping. You have the Annex 1 countries or the rich countries have their grouping, and you have the biggest grouping, which is the G77 and China grouping, which also includes least developed country grouping and also mostly developing countries. So I mentioned that because if we would look at what was promised, what was agreed in previous conference of parties, many of them remain unfulfilled. When as far as I remember, when I first, like Quan, when I started looking at what are these initials, what are these principles that one has to put at heart when talking about the climate or the COP or the climate negotiation, the basic principle in the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change is that the governments should protect the climate system for the benefit of present and future generations of humankind on the basis of equity, and at the same time in accordance with their common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. So that tells a lot, and this principle is important because that recognizes the fact that you have the developing countries who have least contributed to climate change, but they are now suffering the impacts of it, the severe impacts of it. And at the same time, because of their economic situation, they have different capacity to address climate change. That is why in the negotiation, it is very, very important to ask the question, who should limit their emissions and up to what extent? And then at the same time, finance is a key issue, because if we talk about developing countries addressing the impacts of climate change, then that is where the capacity will be taken into consideration, because not all of them would have the capacity to address climate change. In fact, many of the developing countries are already faced with a dilemma that it's not possible to adopt. Because if we would look at the IPCC report, we have less than a decade to, if we don't change track and we don't dramatically decrease emissions, then we're faced with less than 10 decades and we will hit 1.5 degrees centigrade. And to imagine the things that we are experiencing now, severe floods, drought, fires, permafrost problems and all that, that is at 1.2. So at 1.5, these impacts and loopholes, what the scientists were talking about, will be more severe. So in the climate negotiation, the problem was that basic principles of a common but differentiated responsibilities and also capacities, as negotiations continued from the Kyoto that was also in the Kyoto Protocol, which was enacted in 1997. Now, the Kyoto Protocol had 2 commitment periods, and it ended in 2012. The thing is that the discussion before 2012 led to the Paris Agreement of 2015, wherein that basic principle of differentiated responsibility was erased, because now we are facing it, everyone have a share of responsibilities. So the nationally determined contribution, in effect, means everyone will be responsible. Regardless of what you contributed, you are now responsible. And this is what is crucial and would be a big issue in the coming negotiation, because the developing countries will be blamed and said, you also have a responsibility. Instead of the historic emitters like the UK, like the US, most of West Europe, that concept also of historic emission was forgotten by many Western European negotiators. Because they are now starting, if you look at most of the newspaper, the spin is it's China and India that are now the problem. China is the bigger problem. It's now the biggest emission. When we come to think of it, China only surpassed the US in the last almost about 15 years. But before that, when it comes to consumption, in terms of lifestyle, one American consumes an equivalent of a consumption of 20 Indians and 12 Chinese. That was the figure in 2012. Now maybe it was a little adjusted. Maybe the consumption level of one British or one American would be equivalent maybe to consumption of 8 Indians and maybe 4 Chinese. But that is also because we're talking of average. We're talking about a population of 1.3 billion people and 1.3 billion people. So so thinking of average and thinking of pinpointing blame actually is a big problem. And then I also wanted to mention that when we also look at this North-South battle, the spin then was that the Kyoto Protocol is ending, so we have to put something new. When in fact, as I mentioned, the Paris Agreement is an offshoot. It replaced the Kyoto Protocol, and wherein the principle was sort of like diluted. So what is also happening, instead of top-bottom responsibility, we now have a bottom-up approach, where even the most affected would need to reduce as well, which is not a problem. The thing is, if they are already getting impacted more severely than the developed country, and then they also don't have the financial capacity and technology. Now the third part of the nitty-gritty, the third part of the bottleneck is how will those technology be accessed by developing countries when most of those technology are under the intellectual property rights, because that will be the next battle. Everything that will be needed by developing countries in terms of technology and finance are being held in ransom by developed countries. They don't want to give finance. They promised in 2009 in Copenhagen that there will be $100 billion by 2020. That landmark was also moved to 2025 because they could not meet it. So now that 100 billion, actually, to start with, it's very small because these are also the problem of when they say $100 billion, it's coming from thin air. It's not based on science. When in fact, what is needed is more than that. So countries like in India, Bolivia, Ethiopia before, we're talking about also atmospheric space, because if we think about the carbon budget, then the net zero will never be able to deliver when it comes to thinking about the carbon budget, because the carbon budget means how much more tons carbon can we still emit? And that's again in the bottleneck in the negotiation, because developing countries, of course, when we talk about climate, that means their development, because that means how much economic activities can they do to achieve growth, to achieve development. And we could not apply here that you don't need growth, because we're actually talking of the growth. And that is also one reason why developing countries question the concept of the growth, because for them they still need growth, but it is the North who needs sustainable, who needed to do an immediate growth, so that the developing countries can have sustainable growth. So another topic I wanted to quickly mention as well is that when we talk about shifting the goal, when we talk about the budget, and when we talk about how much emission has the Annex 1 countries actually delivered since 1997, I'm talking about the Kyoto Protocol. The IPCC report as well mentioned that the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change reported that the whole of Annex 1 countries only managed to decrease their emission by 13%, which is totally unacceptable. So if you think that in the last from 1997, my math is now showing that I don't have it. Since 1997 until now, if they only reduce 13%, how can we expect them to get their emission? Like the UK target is 68%. The US target is between 50 to 53%. So do we think that they will suddenly wake up tomorrow and before before COP26 immediately reduce and say in the next 10 years we will reduce that? That's why also many of the climate justice movement were saying actually the US, the UK actually needed to reduce by -200. That means they have to go to zero as soon as possible, and then at the same time put big money on climate finance, because otherwise net zero would mean they will just evade responsibility. They will just find some escape clauses so as to provide so as to rationalize ship burdens, disguise climate action, and in some cases continue fossil fuel extraction, burning, and emission. So that's the essence of net zero. And then also it is unacceptable that they put 2050, because actually 2030 is the new 2050. The problems we are facing now have dramatically increased the pace of climate impacts. And so where will the corporations role in it? So Scott already mentioned how this corporate capture is happening, and also Shell. That was actually a key message when the executive of Shell mentioned we actually put that net zero we actually put that in the Paris Agreement. Actually, they have another quote. In 2015 as well, there's a business forum, and the CEO of Shell also boasted that the business forum is the actual event. The UN climate negotiation, that's the side event. So if you talk about COPs or conference of parties, side events are just talks where nothing happens. So the business community is aware that the show is theirs, and that the government are actually the side events where you have all these show and then talks, but in the end it's the business sector that will decide. So although they were saying that they have a role and responsibility, and they're using the net zero by 2050 as their goal to rationalize that they do have a role, Shell also showed in its annual report last year they don't have a budget for all the reforestation that they wanted to do. It's not in their budget. So how can they claim of doing something when they don't even put it in their annual budget? So that's a laughable thing. So my last point here is that when we talk again of climate negotiation, in the past we have a mobilization of 20,000 in Katowice, in Madrid. It reached 25,000. The expectation for Glasgow before COVID was 30,000 as well. And now we would be lucky to reach 50, because of all the problems that Quan mentioned with countries in red list, countries that it's not even if the vaccine offer is successful, the problem as well of many delegations, official negotiators, and also NGO observers is that they have a big responsibility to their families. They might get the vaccine, which actually they're not getting because until now it wasn't delivered and we're running out of time. Even if they get it, they carry their responsibility that when they go back to their families are not vaccinated. So that means they might pick up the virus on the plane from the convention center on the way to the airport and give it back and bring it back to their family. So one thing that I also wanted to add, which is not part of the negotiation, is the fact that when we talk about corporate role, there is now a big asymmetry of power between state, corporations, and communities or people, because there is that investment clauses in all trade agreements that governments negotiate with, and that means the investors state dispute settlement. So even if COPs deliver, but if corporations think that their profit is at stake for any measure that any government wanted, like ban fracking, ban mining, reduce the salary of people, or fast track to renewable energy, the corporations can simply sue the government, and that is one of the big problems we are facing, because that is a policy chill, that corporations have the power to sue governments while governments is finding it difficult to make corporations responsible. So that's the big issue we're grappling with. I hope I did not go over time, so I think I'll just stop here, and we'll look forward to the questions and discussions.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. That was such, I suppose, incredible journey, like back in time to situate COP26 in the struggle of the climate justice movement, and how governments and corporations have evaded responsibility all this time, and what we need to be doing going forward to act and organize for climate justice. And also thanks so much for kind of connecting it back to kind of global solidarity and who COP26 is going to be open to, and what are the risks in the context of COVID, and what is being done or what isn't being done to ensure health justice and access to the vaccine globally. So thank you so much. I'm going to invite Nguyen and Scott to get back onto the panel, which Bryce, who's been doing an unbelievable job in the background in the tech, and just invite questions in the chat. I'm also going to hand over to Rob, MEDAC's climate campaigner, to get onto the panel as well, and we'll kind of be facilitating that. Thanks, Bryce. And yeah, please drop your questions into the chat and I'll pass on to Rob.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Nguyen, Scott, Dorothy. I learned so much in such a short amount of time from all of you. It was such an honor to hear you all speak, and really, really grateful, especially for that connection back to, as Ben mentioned, to the call to global solidarity and global justice, that was brought into that. If anyone has any questions they'd like to ask any of the panelists, please feel free to put those in the chat, or you can also use the raise hand function. I think maybe people still need some thinking time for questions. There's a great question from Tim. So Tim says in the chat, we need more power very soon. So how do we think we can get that power? And I assume that means, people power to win on the demands we're fighting on. So whoever wants to take this question, please feel free to jump in.
I mean, it's kind of a difficult question, because it's basically just asking, how do we win this fight? And how do we win it in time before climate breakdown gets catastrophic? So if we had the answer, we probably wouldn't sit here, because we could probably go home and have a nice evening and chill out with a bottle of wine. But what I would probably say is that during this time of COVID, lots of people have realized that things can change very quickly and very rapidly. Like suddenly governments have more money, suddenly governments can take quite radical steps if they're forced to do that. And lots of people have this awareness now that things can be quite radically different. So now is the time to like talk about these things that need to be fundamentally changed about the way our economies run, our countries run, our governments are running the show. So that is one thing that we need to build on, not to lose this moment of crisis where people are still like, there's lots of people who are like, yeah, let's forget about this, let's get back to normal and stuff. But I think that is one of the things to build power. We need to like say, you noticed for a short time that normal didn't work and it didn't prepare us for the crisis, and that's what we need to connect to. And another thing is obviously like, I need to be cheerleading for the coalition, obviously, but so yeah, like lots of the struggles are connected. Lots of the solutions are already there with different organizations, whether that's trade union groups, whether that's like public transport campaigners, these kind of things like retrofitting public transport, like giving people decent wages, these kind of things are connected. And if we build broad alliances across movements from health justice to social justice, climate justice, that is, I think, how we can build power to push for system change. And yeah, and any cyclists and any like public transport campaigner is doing much more to prevent the climate crisis than any of these big polluters. So I think we have something to build on. We have the people, and that's our strength that we need to yeah. I don't know. That was a long waffle. No, anyone else?
That was a great waffle, Nguyen. Thank you. Dorothy or Scott, would either of you like to come in on this question? I think you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to go back on the question of finance as well, because I think the UK government have said that there will part of its promise in the climate ambition summit that it hosted in December was that there will be no more finance for fossil fuels, when in fact there are 18 projects in the pipeline that it's still financing, it will still put money into. So we need to see a stop on that. And second, when we also say that there's not enough money to address the climate, and then tell the developing countries, well, there's $100 billion by 2025. The thing is, the UN, I remember reading the UN economic program shows that the adaptation cost in developing countries are in the range of 140 billion to about 300 billion per year by 2030. So the amount that is available will never be enough. So how do we? The thing is, these are all macro issues, talking about finance, talking about government responsibilities and how they react to each other. So how do we push the button? How do we put pressure when these are all international relations? Well, I think I always say in the past that we don't leave international relations and economic relations to government, because otherwise they will just do what they've always been doing. We have to make them accountable. We have to ask the questions, like if you said there's no finance for fossil fuels, then why are they? And we don't need to look abroad, even here, Cumbria, and then even here inside, they're still doing that. And maybe the third thing as well is that the biggest issue here also is on energy. How will energy be delivered? And this is where some of the ambitions before of those that prefer nuclear power, or now they're talking about hydrogen. This is when we need to update our knowledge as well, because to me before, I don't understand what is hydrogen, how does it work, what kind of pink, green, blue hydrogen, what are those things? So we need to know those, so that when we question them, we also know what we're talking about. And also the question of for whom? All this transition to renewable energy, but for whom and who will get sacrificed? Because we're also aware that renewable energy will not stop exploitation. It will not stop land grabbing or resource grabbing, because also the source of lithium, the source of those minerals that will be needed for renewable energies are in the south. That is why they are over mining again, and they wanted to. That's why also why Afghanistan is important. Afghanistan have lithium. So connecting these issues as well of security, of war, and energy and climate, these are all connected. So we also, I would also encourage everyone to connect issues and look at why countries are also invading other countries. It's also resources and energy.
Thank you so much for that important reminder, Dorothy. Yeah, it's, it'd be foolish to think that, that colonialism was just a thing of the past. It's very much something that's still here in the present. That's a really important reminder. We've got a couple of questions. I see your hand and I see one in the chat. Before we come to those questions, I promise we will do. Scott, it's all right if I single you out for a question. So, you took us through those amazing screen grabs and showing us all this just, mind-blowing corporate lobbying that's happening into the run-up, to COP. But, there are a lot of people out there who still think that, that maybe polluters and fossil fuel companies partnering with COP or sponsoring in some way, that maybe somehow that will change, their act, and maybe it will make them up their game on the climate crisis. Do you think there's any credibility to that point of view?
No. I think probably this has been the political model that we have followed, particularly for the last 40 years, so-called neoliberalism, where we've outsourced a lot of political power to corporations, and essentially given corporations a lot of free rein to decide what to do in terms of taking action themselves on the climate crisis. We've had 40 years of outsourcing political power to big corporations, and the results are in, and we're going through a period of climate crisis. The climate crisis is already here. This model has failed, and any sort of partnership just risks. In fact, I think there's plenty of evidence, like I said in the slides, just risks kicking the can of climate action further down the road while simultaneously protecting corporate profits. So I think they've had this experiment, they've had the luxury and the power to run this experiment, but they've failed already drastically.
Thank you for that really concise and very clear-cut response, Scott. I see we've got a question from Marjorie. Would it be possible to bring Marjorie in?
Hi, Dorothy. You've kept referring to finances, but I have put in the chat, be mindful that the pre-read PDF that's downloadable on the COP26 website declares that there's actually 70 trillion available in the Glasgow Alliance financial budget. I had to write that in words because I don't know how many noughts that is. But we do need to be aware that there is funding around, but we need transparency of where that funding is going. We need to show us the spreadsheet. We need an audit. We need to measure outcome. Are we getting that funds exactly to what is needed? What projects is it going to be used on? And we certainly don't want it to fund Alok Sharma flying around all over the place when he could be zooming with leaders and things. So, we do need to challenge what's being said in the paperwork for the COP meeting.
Thank you, Marjorie. Dorothy, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, developing countries wrote an open letter about their demands to the COP president and also to Boris Johnson. And then they have mentioned about, of course, the dramatic cuts in emissions. And then also they repeated the concern about finance, because the thing is the 100 billion was not delivered. So until now, I think only 80 billion is there. And the UK is not also putting up with the promise. It's only Germany so far who has met its target, because all the Annex 1 countries, they have to also pledge how much they will contribute. And so there's a big question of who among those Annex 1 countries or developed countries are not fulfilling their obligation. Probably what you have seen as the money. The thing as well is that when we talk about finance, most of the finance go to mitigation. And why? Because mitigation is where all these corporate projects can come in. Way back in 2008, 2009, these are called clean development mechanisms, which are neither clean or nor for development. They are simply mechanism. This will go to all those projects where offsetting can happen, because for corporations, it is more interesting for them because this is where they could push their business. So most of those monies will probably be for all those full solutions project that will be part of the mitigation and not adaptation. Because actually what the developing countries were saying is that we need to adapt, but there's no money for adaptation. Most of the governments and corporations wanted mitigation.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. I'm going to come to a question that's in the chat box, which I think really cuts to the heart of the issue, and of why a lot of people are here and like what a lot of us here could be doing. So this is another question for anyone on the panel who would like to take this. Do you have any ideas about what we as doctors and other health professionals can do to have the most impact now over the next 2 months, and also in the mobilization on November the 6th? So anyone who wants to jump in, go for it.
No, I can give you the go. I will be very quick as well, because many of the developing countries are also saying that the diseases that were previously thought to be gone, eradicated, are back with vengeance. Malaria, which was thought to be gone, is back, and there are different strains as well. So climate change actually have impacts on health, also because you have all those waterborne diseases that now flooding happens everywhere and anytime now. Those have health impacts, and there are many studies as well on pollution and cause and the link to health. So I think for those in health professional, of course, it is very, very important to link the issue of climate and health, and at the same time the fact that if we don't curb pollution, if we don't curb emissions, it is not just about the future where we have runaway climate change, but also it is more and more difficult to stay healthy, to keep a better life. And I think this may be far-fetched, but there's a strong connection as well with housing, because there's a study as well that issue of housing is connected to health and also connected to climate. And the Climate Change Commission also mentioned that the UK is not prepared for a 2-degree warming, because the housing we have here do not have or not equipped for such a degree of warming. So all those connections of issues, infrastructure, facilities, health, and I will go back to the fact that all the technologies with COVID, we've campaigned for fewer vaccines because all those technologies are owned, their intellectual property rights. So continue fighting to how do you call that, to lessen intellectual property rights on anything. Knowledge should be accessible to all.
That's so true. Thank you for that powerful message. Nguyen, I'm sorry to pick on you, but maybe it'd be good to come to you on, what can the health community do?
The health community can do lots of things, right? Like there's I read this somewhere, but like if nurses and doctors are not part of your revision, I don't actually want to be part of it. So like there's, especially during the time of after the pandemic, like everyone realizes how important like health professionals are, right? Like, and that is a really good time to like raise your voice and to connect the dots between climate and health justice. So we need any and all of you out of the streets, talking to as many people as possible to like, so that you're one of the key mobilizing blocks that we need to have to show that we have power. So like connects to the first question that was raised, how do we build power? Like people realize that one of the most important people in society are health professionals, and that's why we need you guys on our side. So anything you can do to like connect the dots, to turn out, to like go out and mobilize your people is gotta be super valuable. I mean, concretely come out on the November the 6th but also like there's going to be like health greenwashing at the COP, right? Like there's going to be loads of people like talking about it, and these kind of things need to be called out. So that is also one of the things that you could quite specifically focus on. Like I know that you're organizing a health hearing. That is also something that I would encourage everyone to take part in the health hearing that MedAct is organizing. And yeah, let's also get the unions involved that are representing health professionals. I think they're very sympathetic to the COP26 Coalition's aims. So yeah, that can be like really strong alliances we can build that can outlast the COP legacy. And yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much for that, Nguyen. That was really powerful what you said about, yeah, if it doesn't involve doctors and nurses, don't want to be part of it. That's really powerful, I think, for a lot of people here to hear. I think we're running out of time, unfortunately, this evening, but before we finish and wrap up for this evening, Scott, did you have like a final word on health greenwashers?
I was just like furiously typing in the chat box, have a look at the sponsors when one mentioned greenwashing, because I think Reckitt are the official hygiene partners of COP26, and I think are trying to paint themselves as you know, some sort of medical solution of some sort, despite the fact that they are contributing massively to like deforestation and so on and so forth and all the intersections. So I guess it's about trying to like find a kind of coherent way, like as kind of Nguyen and Dorothy said, about telling a good story and linking the two of them together. And yeah, just using this moment to like, it's a really important moment to just try and build something and like get into like that organising space. There's 2 months left, but there's still plenty of time. And you'll do things that were right, you'll do things that were wrong. And like that's part of like what organising is about. It's that kind of experiment, and you take what you learned and who knows where it'll go. It could end up helping strengthen the move for a Green New Deal or something amazing, who knows.
Amazing. Thank you so much. That's a really powerful message as well. Like, yeah, it's absolutely true. We will get things wrong, but we will learn from those as well. On that note, Nguyen, Scott, Dorothy, thank you so much. You know, just like, I guess on behalf of everyone here, like, and at MedAct, thank you so much for giving up some of your time to talk to us this evening. Definitely don't take for granted how busy you are as individuals and how much you're doing at the moment. So the fact that you took some time out of your evening to come speak to us is just such an honor. Thank you so much. Before we all wrap up for the evening, just to mention a few things. So, you know, that last question about what can we as, you know, members of the health community do, absolutely pertinent question right now. Am I to add some 2 cents on that, you know, in the next few months, MedAct and the Health for a Green New Deal campaign is going to be mobilizing, hopefully, fingers crossed, in a really big way to sort of ramp up the climate and health movement and the call for health and climate justice in the run up to COP and at COP and way past COP as well. We're going to keep going until we win. So some of the things that are coming up in the next, I guess, couple of months, just to sort of bear in mind. At the moment, there is a bill called the Decarbonisation and Economic Strategy Bill, otherwise known as the Green New Deal Bill, that's going to be retabled in Parliament. This bill aims, you know, at a rapid decarbonisation, to create healthy food systems, to create, you know, retrofitted homes, millions of good green jobs, and many, many other sort of other policy points. We're going to be working with local groups all over the country to mobilize health workers, health students to go and engage members of local communities, to put pressure on local MPs to support this bill and make sure that this bill is in a good place by the time we reach COP26. So we're going to be working with local groups to run these climate clinics in public spaces, hopefully all around the country. We're going to be releasing some more information on how to sign up for that action, how to take part in the coming days. So please do look out for that. It's going to be really exciting. And also, I know it's been mentioned, 6th November, we are going to be working with the COP26 Coalition to run health blocks at demos in towns and cities up and down the UK to show that there is a massive health voice that supports, you know, rapid and effective action for climate justice at COP26 and beyond. As well as this, there's an amazing group of people at the moment in Glasgow and around Scotland who are working on the ground health actions for to have to take place in Glasgow itself. And as Nguyen mentioned before as well, we're going to be running this People's Health hearing. It's going to be online. It's going to involve testimony from members of communities all around the world talking about the impact on their health of our extractive economy, our fossil fuel-based economy, and other forms of oppression, which is going to be very, very powerful. It's going to be a great way to witness some of these terrible things that have happened, and the voices that are actually being barred from COP26 effectively, as we've heard before, through just negligence and, you know, poor planning, but maybe that's even being too generous. So the way to, you know, stay in touch, I think Ben's just put it into the chat. Visit the website, sign up for our email list, please stay in touch. We're going to be running more onboardings, we're going to be doing more trainings, we're going to be getting people connected with groups, and, you know, through that you can join our Slack group where all the action happens and everyone's discussing stuff all the time. Yeah, and you can, if you just sign up for the emails, you get all the information you need to stay involved. This was our first Health for Green New Deal Movement Builder session this evening. We're going to be running another one in 2 months' time in October. Next month is going to be more of a meeting with updates from local groups and the different teams working on Health for Green New Deal. So there'll be more information about that really soon. That'll be the end of September. And that's about all. There is a lot of things going on. Thank you to all of you for taking times out of your for your evening to hear about, you know, some admittedly some very dark things, but also how we're going to resist these things together. And yeah, I don't know if any of the panelists, before we go to any last comments, just very quickly, also a massive shout out to Bryce, who volunteered to do tech support this evening. Bryce, you did an absolutely amazing job, and it's amazing how much love you bring to an online space. I've never seen that before. Do any of the panelists have like a final word they want to contribute before people go?
Yes, I created a meme inspired by Scott's like takeaway message, and I just wanted to show you. It's a very high effort meme. Here it is. Can you see it?
That's amazing. I love it.
I can, yeah, I don't know. It's not that great, but I'm going to share it and spam it everywhere. Thanks. That's for me. Thanks all for inviting me.
Please share that with us, Nguyen. That's fantastic. Amazing, everyone. Thank you, and see you again really soon. Have a really nice evening. Until we win.
Hey, folks.